This is the history that refuses to stay buried. Night falls over Rome like a velvet shroud. Clouds drift across a sliver of moon, casting ghostly shadows on an ancient stone bridge. Down by the sluggish waters of the Tiber, two cloaked figures move with silent purpose. They carry a long bundle wrapped in a tattered carpet. Each furtive glance over their shoulders reveals gaunt cheeks gleaming with sweat in the moonlight. The only sound is the distant croak of frogs and the whisper of their boots on stone. Closer to the riverbank they creep, hearts pounding like drums in their chests. The stench of muddy water and rot rises to meet them. With a final heave, they hoist the bundle over the parapet of the bridge. For an instant, time freezes. A jeweled sleeve slips from the rug, catching a glint of moonlight. Then a splash. Ripples devour the shape of a man sinking below the black current. The men watch as a dark cloak floats to the surface, refusing to drown. One curses and hurls a stone at the fabric. It sinks. In the silence that follows, the assassins melt into the labyrinth of alleyways, leaving the river to guard their secret. The Tiber flows on, indifferent to the violence, quietly swallowing another dark tale. Dawn brings a pale light and a clamor to the banks of the Tiber. Fishermen and papal guards gather where a bloated corpse has snagged in the reeds. A cool mist off the river curls around onlookers' legs as whispers ripple through the crowd. The dead man wears fine boots of Spanish leather, a purse of gold still at his belt. This is no common victim. Gentle hands lift the body onto the muddy shore. Gasps at the sight. 9 vicious stab wounds, and the throat cut so deep the head nearly lolls free. Yet even waterlogged and ashen, the face is recognizable. It is Juan Borgia, Duke of Gandia, son of the Pope. Mothers clutch their children as murmurs swell into wails of shock. In the distance, church bells begin to toll, rolling across Rome's cobbled streets with the grim news. When Pope Alexander VI beholds his beloved son's lifeless form, he lets out a howl like a wounded animal. "Juan," he cries, tears carving tracks down his face. Those nearby shrink back. Never have they seen the supreme pontiff so undone. Alexander cradles Juan's limp hand, oblivious of the blood smearing his jeweled rings. The odor of river mud clings to the corpse, making the Pope gag even as he sobs. Overwhelmed by grief, the once bold Alexander barricades himself in the Castel Sant'Angelo. For days he refuses food and drink, kneeling in solitary vigil on the cold stone floor. His broken voice echoes in the dark chamber. God, perhaps this is punishment for my sins. Through tears he vows to reform. He swears to renounce the worldly corruption that has stained his reign. We will begin with ourselves, and then with all the church. The Pope pleads into the silence. If you want to help me translate more stories like this, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe.
But remorse is fleeting. As the seasons turn, Alexander's grief-stricken promises evaporate. Rome returns to its old rhythms, and soon the tragedy of Juan's death becomes just another whisper in a city of whispers. Yet one question refuses to fade. Who murdered Juan Borgia? In palaces and taverns, suspicions coil like smoke. Some blame the rival Orsini clan, settling a feud with midnight daggers. Others insist the order must have come from within the Pope's own chambers. Could a jealous brother have slain the favored son? Cesare Borgia's name is murmured, though never openly. In corners, some even hint that Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia's spurned husband, orchestrated the murder, seeking revenge for an imagined affair between Juan and Lucrezia. Even Lucrezia herself is not immune from the gossip of the streets. As if a Borgia could be either victim or villain. The truth lies submerged in the Tiber mud with countless other secrets. To understand how the family reached such a night of betrayal, we must step back to the origins of their power. Back to when an ambitious patriarch set the stage for an empire of sin. Years before that fateful night, Italy was a patchwork of warring states and scheming nobles. Power was a prize for the bold and cunning. Amid this, Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia was a man of boundless appetite and ambition. In 1492, when Pope Innocent VIII died, Rodrigo saw his chance. During the conclave beneath Michelangelo's frescoed ceiling, he plied fellow cardinals with bribes as generously as blessings. Servants shuffled heavy sacks of gold and silver through Vatican halls to purchase votes. By the time white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel, Rodrigo Borgia had secured the throne of St. Peter as Pope Alexander VI. Rome soon learned that under Alexander VI, blood proved thicker than holy water. The new pope openly acknowledged his 4 children and swiftly elevated them. Juan was made captain general of the church. Young Cesare, barely in his 20s, became a cardinal, though he preferred a sword to a bishop's staff. Daughter Lucrezia was wedded off to a powerful noble to seal an alliance, and even teenage Chauffret was married to a princess for political gain. Within the frescoed halls of the Vatican, the Borgia family dined on peacock and pomegranate while plotting how to carve out a dynasty. Courtiers watched in awe and disgust as the Pope shamelessly turned the papacy into a family enterprise. At banquets, Alexander would raise a toast to his children's prospects, grinning broadly, while Cesare's dark eyes smoldered at each honor heaped on Juan. It was whispered that even as a boy, Cesare once vowed he would kill his pampered brother one day. So deep ran his envy. The sweet aroma of incense and roast meat could not mask the rank scent of ambition that clung to the Borgias. But power plays can backfire. By 1497, Alexander's web of alliances began to fray. Lucrezia's first marriage to Giovanni Sforza of Milan had outlived its usefulness. The Pope sought to annul the union to forge a new alliance elsewhere. Humiliated and fearing for his life, Lucrezia's husband fled Rome. In his bitterness, Giovanni Sforza spread a shocking accusation. He claimed the Borgias were depraved, that Lucrezia had indulged in incest with her own father and brother. The charge was monstrous, scandalous, and it stuck. Suddenly, the closeness of the Borgia clan took on a darker cast in the public's imagination. Gossip flew from Rome to every court in Europe. Lucrezia, mortified, took refuge in a convent as the annulment was pushed through on dubious grounds of the marriage never being consummated. All the while, that poisonous rumor of incest spread like wildfire, casting a shadow on the family that would never fully lift. During this period of seclusion, another scandal shook the Vatican. In Lucrezia's loneliness behind convent walls, she grew close to a young Spanish chamberlain named Perotto. Before long, whispers arose that she was pregnant. The Pope and Cesare moved swiftly to quash the disgrace. One night, Perotto's corpse was fished from the Tiber, silencing him forever. Soon after, a mysterious infant boy appeared in the Borgia household. Alexander issued bizarre papal bulls acknowledging the child as a Borgia, yet obscuring whether he was the Pope's son or Cesare's. To a scandalized public, the message was clear. The baby was Lucrezia's. Many believed this infans Romanus was the product of unspeakable sin within the Borgia family itself. The incest whispers now roared with new life.
Even as dark rumors swirled, Alexander maneuvered Lucrezia into another marriage in 1498. this time to Alfonso of Aragon, a prince of Naples. It was a political union meant to strengthen ties with Naples against French ambitions. To her surprise, Lucrezia found moments of genuine happiness with young Alfonso. He was handsome and kind, and in time they had a son together. For a brief respite, it seemed the Borgia daughter might enjoy a normal life far from her family's intrigues. But such peace was short-lived. Cesare Borgia had by now shed his cardinal's robes to become a condottiero, a warlord prince. In 1499, he traveled to France, where King Louis XII welcomed him. Cesare received the title Duke of Valentinois, and even took a French princess as his bride, all in exchange for papal support of French claims in Italy. His ambitions firmly aligned with France, Naples' enemy, Cesare returned to Italy with new power at his back. Suddenly, the alliance that Lucrezia's marriage cemented was a liability. Alfonso of Aragon sensed the danger hanging over him in Rome's corridors. He took to wearing chainmail under his doublet and glancing over his shoulder whenever footsteps echoed behind him. His fears were justified. One warm evening, as Alfonso walked the Vatican grounds, assassins fell upon him. He stumbled into the palace with a stab wound in his side, bleeding and terrified but alive. For the moment, Lucrezia rushed to his side, tending him feverishly in a locked chamber. For weeks she changed his blood-soaked bandages and prayed for his recovery. Outside the sick room, Cesare's henchmen prowled like wolves. Late one night, a group of armed men burst into Alfonso's room. Lucrezia screamed as she was dragged away, helpless, and could only watch in horror as an assassin looped a garrote around her weakened husband's throat. Alfonso's eyes bulged. A final strangled gasp rattled from his lips. In moments, it was over. Alfonso was dead, and the murderers vanished into the darkness as swiftly as they had come. The next day, a hush fell over the Vatican. Officially, Alfonso had succumbed to his injuries. Unofficially, everyone knew Cesare Borgia had eliminated his sister's husband to clear the political path. Lucrezia was left a widow once more, cradling her infant son and weeping bitter tears behind black veils. With each obstacle removed, Cesare Borgia's power only grew. Unbound from the church, he cut a bloody swath across central Italy, determined to carve out an empire of his own. Under the banner of the Borgia bull, his forces seized town after town in the Romagna region. Imola, Forlì, Cesena, Rimini. One by one, the local lords fell before Cesare's audacity or were cowed into submission. Those who surrendered quickly were spared, even rewarded with positions under the new regime. Those who resisted met gruesome fates. In one captured city, the defeated young prince was later found drowned in a river, whispered to be on Cesare's orders. Through fear and ferocity, Cesare brought a rough stability to lands long terrorized by petty tyrants. Many common folk even welcomed the end of incessant feuds, believing a strong hand could bring order. And if that strong hand was stained with blood, so be it. They called him Il Valentino, Cesare, Duke of Valentinois. And for a moment, it seemed nothing could halt his ruthless rise. Even voices that tried to condemn Borgia corruption met grim fates. In Florence, a fiery Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola preached against the debauchery in Rome, denouncing Alexander VI as a false shepherd. His sermons of repentance drew throngs of fervent followers. Savonarola even hailed the French king, Charles VIII's invasion of Italy, as a divine scourge to punish the church's wickedness. But Alexander would not tolerate such a challenge. He excommunicated the defiant monk and eventually declared him a heretic. In 1498, Savonarola was arrested, hanged and burned in Florence's public square, his ashes scattered into the Arno River. The Pope had silenced his most vocal critic in a pyre of smoke and flame. For now, no one would stand in the Borgias' way.
By 1501, the Borgias stood at the height of their dominion. Alexander VI had survived every threat thus far, and thanks to hefty bribes and French gold, the papal coffers overflowed. The Pope even created new cardinals in exchange for enormous payments, simony on a grand scale, to bankroll Cesare's wars. The papal states were more firmly under Rome's control than they had been in generations. The Borgias reveled in their triumph, yet absolute power bred unbridled excess. Nowhere was this excess more notorious than at a certain feast in the Vatican that even Rome's worldly citizens would remember with shock. On the last night of October 1501, a scandalous gathering took place inside the Apostolic Palace. By Cesare Borgia's arrangement, 50 courtesans were invited to a banquet in the papal apartments. Hundreds of candles burned in golden chandeliers, their flames dancing in the heavy air. The hall reeked of spiced wine, sweat, and perfume. At the head of the table sat Pope Alexander himself, swathed in rich robes, with Cesare on one side and Lucrezia on the other. After an extravagant feast, the real entertainment began. Servants scattered roasted chestnuts across the marble floor, and the courtesans, laughing, dropped to their hands and knees to crawl after the rolling nuts. The gathering erupted into a lewd game that soon became an open orgy. The Pope and his 2 children looked on with indulgent smiles, perhaps even joining in, according to some accounts, as flesh and sin danced shamelessly in the candlelight. It was said that Cesare offered prizes of gold for the man who demonstrated the greatest virility that night. By dawn, the banquet hall was a wreck of overturned goblets and rumpled finery. The Pope's own master of ceremonies, Johannes Burchard, recorded the event in his diary with horror, dubbing it the Banquet of Chestnuts. Even in a city as jaded as Rome, this night's debauchery became legendary, a new byword for the depths of papal corruption. Yet even as the Borgias indulged, enemies within their circle plotted. In late 1502, Cesare faced treachery from some of his hired condottieri, mercenary captains who had helped him conquer cities, but now feared his growing power. Rather than crush the brewing rebellion by open war, Cesare chose subterfuge. He offered reconciliation and invited the disaffected lords to meet him in the town of Senigallia under safe conduct. Winter's chill hung in the air as his would-be betrayers arrived, believing the Duke's honeyed promises. Cesare greeted them with warm embraces and a grand feast as if welcoming back prodigal friends. But at the height of the celebration, his trap was sprung. Cesare's loyal guards burst into the banquet hall with swords drawn. The conspirators were seized before they could resist. One by one, in a dim courtyard by torchlight, Cesare had them executed that same night, strangled or stabbed while the Duke of Valentinois looked on in cold silence. It was a masterstroke of calculated brutality. Those who weren't killed were utterly cowed. News of Cesare's betrayal at Senigallia spread, and with it, a mixture of horror and grim admiration. The Florentine envoy Niccolò Machiavelli, who witnessed the carnage, was impressed by Cesare's efficiency. He would later cite the Duke's cunning elimination of his foes as an example of decisiveness in his writings. To others, it was clear that anyone who crossed the Borgias could never again sleep soundly. But fate, ever capricious, was turning against the Borgias. In the sweltering summer of 1503, Pope Alexander VI and Cesare attended a dinner at a cardinal's villa outside Rome. Within days, both fell gravely ill with fever. Some whispered that the Borgias had intended to poison their host and accidentally tainted themselves. A fitting twist of poetic justice. Others suspected malaria from the mosquito-infested marshes. Whatever the cause, the powerful pope, now in his 70s, found himself bedridden and delirious. Cesare, though younger and stronger, was also struck down, racked by chills and pain. Alexander's condition worsened rapidly. On August 18th, 1503, after days of agony, Pope Alexander VI died. Cesare, though he eventually recovered from his sickbed, would soon learn that his father's death was the beginning of his own ruin. The Pope's death plunged the Vatican into chaos. Upon hearing that the mighty Alexander was gone, the people of Rome flooded the streets. Some in mourning, many in grim satisfaction. A frenzy of unrest shook the city. Looters ransacked the mansions of Borgias supporters, emboldened by the sudden power vacuum. Meanwhile, Alexander's corpse itself became a morbid spectacle. In the August heat, the body began to decompose with shocking speed. Witnesses whispered that by the afternoon of his death, the Pope's skin had already darkened to the color of mulberry, his features bloated beyond recognition. His tongue swelled and protruded grotesquely, and a foul stench filled the hall. The Vatican staff struggled to contain the decay, eventually forcing the corpse into a coffin too small for its swollen form. Superstitious observers murmured that the devil had come to claim his due. So ended the life of Alexander VI, in a grotesque tableau that seemed a final judgment on his reign. In the vacuum that followed, the fortunes of the Borgia family collapsed almost overnight. The College of Cardinals, freed from Alexander's dominance, quickly elected a new pope who would oppose Borgia influence. After a brief stopgap, Pope died. Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, sworn enemy of Alexander, ascended as Pope Julius II. He wasted no time dismantling the Borgia Empire. Julius II even ordered the Borgia family crest chipped off walls and ceilings, determined to erase their memory. He stripped Cesare of his titles and demanded the return of all papal lands he had conquered. Cesare, still recovering and now without papal backing, had little choice but to comply. The great duke's allies evaporated. The hunter had become the prey. By the end of 1503, Cesare was forced to flee Rome, a fallen prince. Cesare wandered in search of new fortunes, eventually seeking refuge with his brother-in-law, the King of Navarre. But even far from Italy, fate did not spare him. In 1507, Cesare Borgia met his end in a minor skirmish on the fringes of Spain. Ever the fearless fighter, he charged into battle with only a handful of men and found himself ambushed. Surrounded and separated from his comrades, Cesare was run through by a lance. He died on a muddy field, far from the grandeur of Rome at just 31 years old. When soldiers later examined the body, they found it covered in old scars from a lifetime of violence. The once proud Duke of Valentinois was buried in an unremarkable grave, his grand dreams of a Borgia dynasty extinguished. And what of Lucrezia Borgia, the daughter whose name had been sullied by so much scandal? She survived the tempest. After Alexander's death, Lucrezia remained in the north, securely ensconced as Duchess of Ferrara by her third marriage into the Este family. Away from Rome, she distanced herself from the sins of her father and brother. In Ferrara, Lucrezia became a patron of the arts, a respected noblewoman who hosted poets and painters instead of poisoners. Yet shadows of her past lingered. There were whispers in Ferrara's courts that the infamous Lucrezia carried a vial of poison in a ring, or that she still wept at night for the loved ones lost to her family's ambition. In truth, by most accounts, she became a devoted mother and a pious duchess. When news of her family's ruin reached her, Lucrezia reportedly fell to her knees in despair and prayer. She died in 1519 at age 39, not as a seductress or sorceress, but as a woman worn by life's trials. Still, even in death, she could not escape the tarnish of the Borgia name. The legend of Lucrezia Borgia, the beautiful, possibly deadly pawn of her family, would long outlive the real woman.
The Borgia family's rise and fall left a mark on history as indelible as blood on marble. In the years that followed, their very name became synonymous with the excesses of Renaissance popes and the rot that had seeped into the church. Their infamy fueled calls for reform. Indeed, in 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther would famously launch the Protestant Reformation, railing against the decadence of Rome, sins that the Borgia era had come to symbolize. Yet the fascination endures. The story of the Borgias had been told and retold in countless forms: plays, novels, operas, television, each time with the same morbid allure. It is a saga of ambition and evil, but also of human moments. A father's grief for his son, a sister's love and sorrow, a warrior's daring. It compels us because it shows power's seductive thrill and its ultimate price. And so we remember the haunting images: a body flung into dark waters under the Roman moon, a pope weeping over his murdered son, a golden-haired duchess stirring a poisoned goblet, at least in legend, with a melancholic smile, and a brilliant young commander standing triumphant on a battlefield one day and lifeless in the mud the next. The story of the Borgias refuses to stay buried because it holds a mirror to the timeless dance of power and corruption. It reminds us that truth can be stranger and darker than fiction, and that even the mightiest can be brought low by their own deeds. This is history that refuses to stay buried.